She fired him in a fit of rage without hearing his side. But just hours later, this single father became her only hope to save her daughter. The morning light slanted through the tall glass windows of the Monroe estate, spilling across the marble floor in long, cold streaks. Ethan Cole pushed his cleaning cart into the grand hallway, the faint squeak of the wheels echoing against the high ceilings. He had already been working for an hour, polishing the stair rails, sweeping the corridor rugs, straightening the rows of leather chairs in the library. This was his quiet hour, when the house's usual noise of business calls and staff chatter hadn't yet begun. He liked it that way. Ethan was a tall, broad-shouldered man with short dark hair and hands that still bore faint scars from the years he'd spent working construction before. Everything changed. His gray work shirt was clean but worn. The blue apron with the company's cleaning logo faded from too many washes. He moved with a kind of deliberate efficiency that came from habit and necessity, because every hour on the job meant money for rent, food for his 7-year-old daughter Grace, and maybe, if nothing else went wrong this month, a little left over for the new sneakers she needed. He knew this mansion better than most of its guests, where the parquet floors let out a tiny groan on the left side of the hallway, where the antique chandelier in the upstairs landing flickered if you touched the switch too fast, where the hidden button under a bookshelf panel lit the track lights above the Monet painting in the West Wing. But he'd never been more than a shadow in the background, someone who made the place shine without anyone noticing who did it. Today, though, there was no hiding. The office door at the far end of the corridor swung open, and Olivia Monroe stepped out. Ethan had only seen her up close a handful of times in the months he'd worked here. 36 years old, blonde hair pulled neatly back, brown eyes sharp and assessing, the navy blue suit she wore cut to perfection. She looked like a person who had long ago learned never to waste a second or a word. Her gaze fell immediately on the glass-walled conference room, where a whiteboard stood on wheels. It had been covered earlier in the morning with smudged black ink and faint lines. Ethan had passed through before sunrise, wiping it clean as part of his routine. Now the surface gleamed bright and spotless. "Mr. Cole," she said, her voice even but edged with steel. "Did you clean this board?" He set down the cloth he was holding. "Yes, ma'am. That board had formulas on it, projections from last night's strategy session. My team worked until 3 in the morning on those numbers." She stepped closer, her heels clicking sharply against the marble. "And now it's gone." Ethan felt the words hit him like a cold wave. He had assumed the scribbles were left over from some past meeting, just like the random notes he erased in other rooms every day. "Miss Monroe, I didn't realize—" "You didn't ask," she cut in. Her tone didn't rise, but it hardened. "You erased hours of work. We can't get them back." He took a breath, ready to offer to help somehow, to find a way to undo the mistake. But she raised a hand as if to stop him. "Enough. You're fired. Effective immediately. See accounting for your final check." Something in his chest tightened, not from anger, but from the sudden calculation of what this meant. No paycheck, no steady hours, no security. Grace's face flashed in his mind, the way she smiled when he picked her up from school, the quiet way she sometimes asked if things were okay when she overheard him talking to bill collectors. From the corner of his vision, movement caught his eye. A small figure stood in the doorway to Olivia's private quarters. Norah Monroe, 5 years old, dark hair falling over one eye, barefoot in her pajamas. She looked from her mother to Ethan, her expression puzzled. "Mom?" she asked softly. Olivia's face softened for a fraction of a second, but then her jaw tightened again. "Go back to your room, sweetheart." Ethan nodded once, keeping his gaze low, and moved past her toward the service hallway. He didn't argue. There was no point. In his experience, when a person like Olivia Monroe decided something, it was already set in stone. But as he walked away, the echo of Nora's voice stayed with him. Light, uncertain, like she knew something was about to shift in their world, even if she couldn't yet name it. The rain started just as Ethan stepped out of the Monroe estate. Heavy drops hammered the driveway, turning the perfectly manicured gravel into a slick mess. He pulled his thin jacket tighter around his shoulders, but it was no match for the wind cutting in from the bay. His mind was a storm too, calculating rent due in a week, the stack of unpaid utility bills on the kitchen counter, and Grace's field trip fee that was supposed to be sent to school tomorrow. Losing this job wasn't just a setback, it was a collapse. By the time he reached the bus stop at the end of the long private road, his hair was dripping and his shoes were soaked through. He sat on the hard bench, water pooling under him, and pulled out his phone. No missed calls, no new job alerts. He opened the budgeting app he used like a lifeline, and the numbers stared back at him with cruel finality. Even if he picked up double shifts at the diner where he sometimes washed dishes, he wouldn't cover everything. When the bus finally groaned to a stop, he climbed aboard, barely noticing the driver's nod. The ride into the city was slow, traffic snarled by the weather. Through the window, he watched the skyline blur into gray, the rain tracing crooked paths down the glass. His reflection looked older than 36, lines carved by too many nights of worry, eyes dulled by exhaustion. Grace was waiting when he got home, sitting cross-legged on the couch with her school notebook open in her lap. She looked up, her smile faltering when she saw his face. "Bad day?" she asked quietly. He set his bag down and forced a smile. Something like that. He didn't want to tell her yet, not until he had some kind of plan. "How was school?" She brightened for a moment, holding up a crayon drawing of the two of them standing under a big sun. "We had art day. I made this for you." Ethan's throat tightened as he took the paper. "It's perfect, Gracie. Thank you." He hugged her, breathing in the faint scent of her strawberry shampoo. She was the one thing in his life that kept him steady, the anchor when everything else felt like it was breaking apart. That night, after Grace was asleep, Ethan sat at the kitchen table with his laptop open, scrolling through job postings. Most were miles away, or required certifications he didn't have, or paid less than he was making before. He was about to close the lid when his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" There was silence at first, just the faint hum of a line connecting. Then a voice, low, clipped but unmistakable. "Olivia Monroe." "Mr. Cole," she said, "I need you to come back to the estate. Now." He straightened in his chair, unsure if he'd heard correctly. "Ms. Monroe, This is not a request," she interrupted. "It's urgent. I'll have a car waiting outside your building in 20 minutes. Before he could ask why, the line went dead. He sat there for a moment, phone still in his hand, the weight of her words pressing in. Urgent. Not a request. Something had happened. Something that made her call the man she had fired only hours earlier. And though every instinct told him to keep his distance, he knew he was going to walk out that door when the car arrived. The black sedan pulled up exactly 20 minutes later, its headlights slicing through the wet darkness outside Ethan's apartment. Building 911. The driver, a tall man in a dark suit, stepped out and opened the rear door without a word. Ethan hesitated for a moment, glancing up at the window of Grace's room, where the faint glow of her nightlight shone through the curtains. He'd left her a note on the kitchen table just in case, but his chest tightened, knowing he was walking into something blind. Inside the car, the smell of leather and faint cologne filled the air. The city slid past in streaks of neon and rain, the windshield wipers keeping time with Ethan's thoughts. He tried to guess what could have possibly changed Olivia Monroe's mind. What could have been so urgent that she would call him after firing him so coldly? He kept circling back to her daughter. That small, hesitant voice in the hallway earlier. The way Norah had looked between them as if sensing something. They reached the estate in record time, the sedan sweeping through the wrought iron gates and up the winding drive. The house loomed in the rain, every window glowing against the storm. The driver led him inside, bypassing the main hall and taking him straight to the private wing Ethan had never been in before. Olivia stood in the doorway to a dimly lit room, her suit jacket gone, the sleeves of her silk blouse pushed up. Her hair, normally perfect, had come loose in a few strands around her face. Her eyes met his, sharp but tinged with something he hadn't seen before. Unease. "Mr. Cole," she began, her voice lower than usual, "I need your help. And before you say anything, yes, I know I fired you, but circumstances have changed." Ethan crossed his arms. "What happened?" She stepped aside, revealing the scene inside the room. Norah sat curled up on a chair, knees pulled to her chest, her small hands clutching a folded piece of paper. Her eyes were red and she wouldn't look up. "She won't speak to anyone," Olivia said quietly. "Not to me, not to her nanny. She's been like this since an hour ago." Ethan's brow furrowed. "Did something happen?" Olivia hesitated, then nodded toward the paper in Norah's hands. "That note was left at the front door. No envelope. Just This. Ethan crouched beside the girl. Hey, Norah. Remember me? She lifted her gaze just enough for him to see the fear in her eyes. Slowly, she handed him the paper. His stomach sank as he unfolded it. The handwriting was jagged, almost rushed. You think your money can protect you? It can't. Keep her close or you'll lose her. Ethan's jaw clenched. He looked at Olivia, who was watching him closely. You called me back for this? I called you back because Norah trusts you, Olivia said firmly, more than anyone else here. I saw it earlier. She looked at you when she was scared, not me, not anyone else. I need you to help me keep her safe until I can figure out who sent that message. Rain lashed against the windows, and Ethan felt the weight of the situation pressing in. This wasn't about cleaning floors or a missed paycheck anymore. This was about a 5-year-old girl and a threat that could be real. Against every instinct telling him to walk away from the woman who'd humiliated him just hours earlier, he found himself saying, all right, but if I do this, we do it my way. Olivia didn't blink. Agreed. Somewhere deep down, Ethan knew his life had just taken a turn he could never undo. Ethan's way began with motion, quiet, purposeful motion. He moved through the Monroe estate with a janitor's memory for detail, seeing things others overlooked. The polished floors reflected flashes of lightning from the windows, the heavy scent of rain drifting in through the faint cracks in the French doors. He noted the security cameras, the blind spots between their coverage, the creak in the back stairwell that could betray a footstep. Olivia followed him at first, her arms crossed tightly, but she didn't speak. She seemed to understand that for the moment, she was in unfamiliar territory. The first thing Ethan did was get Norah out of the open areas. He guided her to a small sitting room tucked behind the library. No windows, just a soft couch and shelves lined with children's books. He crouched down to her level, speaking softly, letting her know she wasn't in trouble, that she was safe. Slowly, the tension in her shoulders eased, though she still clutched a stuffed rabbit so tightly its ears bent sideways. Back in the main hall, Olivia was on her phone with someone from her security firm. Her voice was brisk, controlled, but Ethan could hear the faint undertone of frustration. When she hung up, she said, "They're sending someone in the morning to sweep the property and review the camera footage. Until then, we lock this place down," Ethan interrupted, not unkindly. "No unknown visitors. No staff coming or going without you knowing exactly who they are. And Norah stays within sight of one of us at all times." Olivia hesitated. It wasn't in her nature to take orders, especially from a man she'd fired earlier that day. But the edge in Ethan's tone was the voice of someone who had dealt with danger before, someone who understood urgency. She nodded. Agreed. He walked the perimeter next, checking doors and windows, making mental notes about which locks were loose, which hedges outside could hide a person, where someone could slip in unnoticed. As he worked, he thought about the note's words, "Keep her close, or you'll lose her." The threat wasn't vague. Whoever wrote it wanted Olivia to feel cornered, and they were succeeding. When he returned to the sitting room, Norah was half asleep on the couch, her small hand resting on the stuffed rabbit. Olivia was there too, sitting beside her daughter, one hand gently stroking the girl's hair. The sight was almost jarring. Ethan had only seen Olivia in boardrooms, sharp-edged and unshakable. Here she looked like a mother stripped down to her most human fear. "Do you have any idea who would do this?" he asked quietly. Olivia's eyes stayed on Norah. "My company has enemies, competitors, people who've lost money when I've made it, and there are personal grudges too, but nothing that should involve my daughter." She looked at him then, and for the first time that night, there was no steel in her gaze. "You believe it's real, don't you? The threat?" "Yes," Ethan said without hesitation. "And I think whoever it is has been watching you, which means they've seen me too." A flicker of realization crossed her face. "That's why you wanted to do this your way. Because if this person is bold enough to walk up to your door and leave a note, they're bold enough to come closer," he said. "We have to be ready for that." Thunder rolled in the distance, and for a moment, the house felt like it was holding its breath. Olivia leaned back in her chair, her voice quieter now. "Then tell me what's next." Ethan looked around the dim room, the shelves of books, the sleeping child, the storm pressing against the walls. "Next," he said, "we make sure that if they try anything tonight, they regret it. Somewhere in the dark beyond the estate's walls, he had the unsettling sense that someone was already testing their resolve. The night deepened into that unnerving quiet that comes after a storm, the kind where every creak and whisper in a house feels louder than it should. Ethan stayed awake in the sitting room, seated in an armchair angled toward the only door. Norah was curled up on the couch, her stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin, breathing slow and even. Olivia had insisted on staying too, though exhaustion was beginning to weigh on her posture. She sat with a laptop open on her knees, pretending to answer emails, but her eyes kept drifting toward her daughter. Ethan's instincts were on high alert. He'd done enough low-paying security gigs in the past to recognize the rhythm of a place when something felt wrong. The house was too still. He had made a point of turning off all unnecessary lights so that anyone outside wouldn't get a clear view in. Only the warm glow of a lamp near Norah illuminated the room. Just after midnight, a faint sound cut through the stillness, a metallic click, subtle but distinct. Ethan's head lifted instantly. Olivia didn't seem to hear it at first, but when he raised a hand for silence, she froze. The sound came again, a slow, deliberate noise from the direction of the French doors that led out to the garden. He moved quietly, signaling for Olivia to stay put. Every step toward the source felt amplified in the silence. Pressing his back to the wall, he listened. A shadow flickered against the glass. A human outline, just long enough for him to be sure it wasn't a trick of the light. Whoever it was, they weren't moving away. They were waiting. Ethan's mind worked fast. If the intruder was here for the girl, confronting them directly might be exactly what they wanted. Instead, he slipped into the hallway and took the longer route that circled around to the garden entrance from outside. The night air was cold, the grass still wet from the rain, and the smell of damp earth hung heavy. He kept low, using the trimmed hedges for cover until he was close enough to see the figure clearly. Dressed in dark clothing, hood pulled low, the intruder was crouched by the French doors, working a thin tool into the lock. The patience and precision told Ethan this wasn't a random trespasser. Whoever this was had done this before. Ethan stepped out from behind the hedge, his voice firm but low. "You've got exactly 3 seconds to drop that and walk away." The figure startled, then turned. But instead of retreating, they bolted toward the side of the house. Ethan gave chase, boots pounding the wet grass. The intruder was quick, weaving through the shadows, but Ethan's longer stride closed the gap. Just as he reached out, the figure whipped around, swinging the metal tool. Ethan caught their wrist mid-swing, twisting it sharply until the tool clattered to the ground. They struggled for a moment before breaking free and sprinting toward the back gate. Ethan didn't follow this time. There was no telling if this was just a distraction to draw him away from the house. He doubled back fast, heart hammering, every muscle tense. When he slipped back inside, Olivia was standing in the sitting room doorway, her face pale, eyes wide. "What happened?" He locked the French doors behind him before answering. "Someone tried to get in. I scared them off." Her gaze dropped to the sleeping child on the couch, and he could see the wave of fear ripple through her. She didn't ask the obvious questions. Who it was, why they were here, because deep down she already knew the answer. Ethan picked up the drop tool from the floor, turning it in his hand. It was a lockpick, worn from use. Whoever had been outside tonight wasn't guessing their way in. They knew exactly what they were doing. "We can't wait for morning," Ethan said, his voice low but certain. "Whoever this is, they're not done, and next time, they might not run." Ethan didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Instead, he sat at the kitchen table with the lockpick laid out in front of him, turning it over in the dim light. Olivia had tried to convince him to rest, but the idea of closing his eyes while someone out there was planning another move felt impossible. He learned long ago that details were everything. If you studied an object long enough, it might start telling you its story. The pick was old, the metal darkened with wear, the handle wrapped in black electrical tape that had frayed at the edges. This wasn't something picked up from a hardware store on impulse. It had been used before, probably many times. Ethan noticed a faint engraving on the metal near the base, 2 interlocking letters, worn but still visible. HRC. At first it meant nothing, but as the sky began to lighten with the first gray streaks of dawn, Ethan's memory flickered back to a conversation he'd overheard weeks ago while mopping the hallway near Olivia's office. 2 of the estate's groundskeepers had been talking about someone named Rick Carson, a man who'd been fired from the Monroe staff years earlier for crossing a line with another employee. The details were vague, but the tone in their voices had been sharp, uneasy. By the time Olivia walked into the kitchen, wearing a fresh suit and looking like she was preparing for war, Ethan already had a plan forming. She poured herself coffee, studying him over the rim of the mug. "You've been up all night," she said. "Someone's got a personal stake in this," Ethan replied, pushing the lockpick toward her. "Recognize the initials?" She frowned, leaning closer. "WRC number. Should I?" "Rick Carson," Ethan said. "Worked for you years ago. Got fired. According to your own staff, he didn't take it well." Olivia's brows drew together, a flicker of recognition crossing her face. "I remember him. He was a maintenance supervisor. Talented, but volatile. He threatened to sue after I let him go. I thought it ended there." "People like that don't just let things go," Ethan said, "especially if they think you ruined their life. And if he's desperate enough, he might go after the one thing he thinks will hurt you most. Your daughter." She set her mug down with a quiet clink. "Then we find him." Ethan nodded, but he didn't say we'll call the police. Experience told him that involving law enforcement too soon could spook a man like Carson, make him disappear before they had proof. And proof was what they needed, especially if Carson had help. By mid-morning, Ethan was at a rundown hardware store on the east side of the city. The kind of place where lockpicks weren't sold openly, but could be found if you knew the right person to ask. The clerk, a wiry man with grease-stained hands, took one look at the tool Ethan laid on the counter and said, "Haven't seen this in a while. Carson makes these himself. Sells them to guys who know their way around a lock." Ethan didn't push too hard. He didn't need the clerk to clam up. But he walked out with the name of a bar where Carson was rumored to hang around and a warning. "If you're looking for him, be careful. He's not just mad. He's got nothing to lose." Back at the estate, Olivia had tightened security. The gates were closed, the few trusted staff members given explicit instructions, and Norah stayed in the most secure wing with a nanny and 2 guards outside the door. Olivia met Ethan in the study, where the curtains were drawn tight. "Any luck?" she asked. "I have a lead," he said, "but it means going out there, and if I'm right, Carson won't be alone." She stepped closer, her voice low. "Ethan, if this is dangerous—" "It is," he cut in, "but the longer we wait, the closer he gets to trying again. I'd rather meet him on my terms than his." For a moment, Olivia just looked at him, her jaw tight. Finally, she said, "Then you're not going alone." It was the first time since he'd met her that she'd spoken like they were on the same side. And as much as Ethan wanted to keep her out of harm's way, he also knew she had her own reasons for wanting to face this man. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he felt it, that this wasn't just about Carson anymore. There was something else under the surface, something Olivia wasn't telling him. The bar smelled of stale beer, cigarettes, and the kind of trouble that didn't need an invitation. It sat on the outskirts of the industrial district, the kind of place where sunlight rarely reached and the sound of distant freight trains filled the pauses in conversation. Ethan parked 2 blocks away, not wanting his presence announced by the sound of tires crunching gravel in the lot. Olivia sat in the passenger seat, her blonde hair tucked beneath a dark knit cap, the tailored lines of her navy coat doing little to disguise the intensity in her eyes. "This isn't your world," Ethan said quietly, his hand resting on the steering wheel. "When things turn bad in a place like this, they turn fast." She met his gaze without flinching. "He went after my daughter. That makes it my world." Ethan didn't argue. They got out, walking separately toward the entrance, blending into the small group of smokers clustered by the door. Inside, the lighting was low enough to make everyone's face a blur until you got close. The air was heavy with the murmur of low conversations and the clack of billiard balls from a corner table. Ethan's eyes scanned the room automatically, locking onto a man in the far booth. Heavy-set but not soft, mid-40s, a week's worth of stubble, wearing a brown leather jacket that had seen better decades. Rick Carson. The scar cutting across his right knuckle was just as Ethan remembered from the night before, a flash of pale skin when he tried to swing the lockpick. Carson wasn't alone. 2 men flanked him, both younger, both with the restless energy of people looking for an excuse to start something. On the table between them sat a half-empty bottle of whiskey and a small metal case. Ethan moved toward the bar first, ordering a coffee just to have a reason to stand there. From that angle, he could see Carson leaning forward, speaking low to his companions. The man's voice carried just enough for Ethan to catch fragments. Olivia's name. The kid. Next time, we don't wait. Olivia slipped into a seat 2 tables away, her back to Carson but her head angled so she could watch him in the reflection of the bar mirror. Ethan could see her fingers gripping her cup, the knuckles pale. When Carson finally noticed Ethan, recognition flickered in his eyes, followed by a slow, mocking smile. He leaned back, spreading his arms as if to welcome him. "Well, if it isn't the help," he said loudly enough to draw attention from nearby tables. "How's life in the big house these days?" Ethan didn't bite. He walked over slowly, stopping just short of the booth. "You were on the Monroe estate last night. That was your mistake." Carson's smile widened, but there was a flicker of something sharper beneath it. "Funny thing, you sound like you think you can tell me what to do. You forget. You're nothing. She took everything from me. Maybe it's time she learned what that feels like." Before Ethan could answer, Olivia stood and approached. The noise in the bar seemed to dull, conversations dipping as patrons realized who she was. Even here, her presence carried weight. She stopped beside Ethan, her eyes fixed on Carson. "You want to come after me? Fine," she said, her voice steady but cold. "But you so much as think about touching my daughter again, and I promise you'll regret it more than losing your job." Carson laughed, but it was hollow. "You think you scare me? You live in your glass tower and believe your money keeps you safe. But people like me, we don't forget. We don't forgive." Ethan saw Carson's hand drift toward the metal case on the table. Without hesitation, he slammed his palm down on it, leaning in until his face was inches from Carson's. "I'm giving you one chance to walk away. No second warnings." The tension snapped. One of Carson's men stood abruptly, reaching for something under his jacket. But Ethan was faster. He shoved the man back into the booth, the movement sending glasses tumbling and shattering on the floor. The other man lunged only to find Olivia stepping back sharply, her heel slamming into his shin. He swore, stumbling long enough for Ethan to grab Carson by the front of his jacket and haul him halfway out of the booth. "This ends now," Ethan said, his voice low but carrying enough threat to freeze the other men. "If I see you within a mile of her again, I won't be talking next time." He released Carson with a shove that sent him back into the seat, then turned and guided Olivia toward the door. The bar's patrons watched in silence, the heavy quiet following them outside like a shadow. As they stepped into the cold night air, Olivia exhaled shakily, though her steps didn't falter. "He's not done," she said. "No," Ethan agreed, "but now he knows we're not waiting for him to make the next move." Somewhere behind them, a door creaked open, and Ethan caught the brief glint of metal and the light spilling from the bar. Carson wasn't the kind of man to take a warning and vanish. The real fight, Ethan knew, was still ahead. The storm rolled in just after midnight, rain hammering against the tall windows of the Monroe estate in hard, relentless sheets. Lightning flashed across the grounds, throwing the manicured hedges and long gravel drive into stark relief before plunging them back into darkness. Ethan had been walking the halls for hours, unable to shake the coiled tension in his chest. Carson had been quiet since the bar. Too quiet. Men like him didn't slink away. They waited until the air went still, then struck. Olivia was in the upstairs study, the door locked, going over security reports with two of her most trusted guards. Norah slept in the adjoining nursery, the soft glow of a nightlight spilling across her small bed. Ethan paused outside her door every time he passed, listening for the steady rhythm of her breathing, each quiet inhale a reminder of what was at stake. The first sign came as a whisper of motion on the security feed. Ethan stopped mid-step, eyes narrowing at the monitor mounted in the hallway. A figure in a rain-soaked jacket slipped past the main gate, not breaking it open, but moving through it like someone who knew exactly how to bypass its sensors. Another shadow followed, then another. 3 of them, spreading out along the drive. He didn't waste time calling anyone. He jogged to the nearest supply closet, grabbing the heavy flashlight and the metal baton he kept there. On his way to the back stairs, he pressed the intercom button. "Olivia, lock her room and stay there. Do not open that door for anyone but me." There was a pause before her voice came back, low but steady. "What's happening?" "Company," he said and cut the line. The rain was colder than he'd expected, soaking through his shirt in seconds as he slipped out the side door. The grounds were slick, the smell of wet earth sharp in the air. He moved low and quiet toward the east side of the property, where one of the figures was crouched near the basement entrance. Ethan closed the distance fast, the crunch of his boots masked by the thunder overhead. He struck with the baton before the man could stand, sending him sprawling into the mud. The second shadow came out of nowhere, a flash of movement to Ethan's left. They slammed into each other hard, the impact knocking the flashlight from his hand. They grappled in the dark, boots sliding on wet stone, until Ethan drove his shoulder into the man's chest and sent him crashing against the wall. He didn't have time to finish it, because the third figure was already gone from sight. Ethan's gut told him where he'd be headed. He sprinted for the main stairs, taking them three at a time, his soaked clothes leaving a trail on the polished floor. As he rounded the corner to the nursery hall, he saw him, Carson, standing in the soft glow from Norah's door, one hand on the frame, the other holding something small and glinting in the light. "Step away," Ethan said, his voice low but filled with steel. Carson turned, his mouth twisting into something between a smirk and a snarl. "You should have stayed invisible, janitor. Now you're in the way." "You're not touching her," Ethan said, moving forward slowly, every muscle ready to explode into motion. "You take one more step, and you won't leave this house standing." Carson's eyes flicked past him, and for a heartbeat, Ethan thought he might run. But instead, Carson lunged toward the nursery. Ethan reacted without thinking, crossing the space in two strides and slamming into him. The two men hit the floor hard, the knife skittering across the hall. Carson fought like a man with nothing left to lose, fists driving into Ethan's ribs. But adrenaline and purpose made Ethan stronger. He got an arm around Carson's neck, tightening until the fight bled out of him, and his body went limp. Olivia was suddenly there, breathless, the security guards behind her. One scooped up the knife while the other took Carson's arms, hauling him up. He was awake again now, cursing and spitting, but it didn't matter. The fight was over. Norah stood in the doorway, clutching her stuffed rabbit, eyes wide but dry. Ethan crouched to her level, his voice softer now. "It's okay, kiddo. You're safe." She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around his neck, holding on tight. Olivia watched, something shifting in her expression. Not the guarded, calculating gaze of a CEO, but something warmer, more human. Later, when the police had taken Carson away and the estate was quiet again, Olivia found Ethan in the kitchen, a mug of coffee cooling in front of him. She sat across from him, still in her rumpled suit, her hair damp from the rain. "I owe you more than I can say," she said. He shook his head. "You don't owe me anything. Protecting her, that's worth more than any paycheck." But Olivia leaned forward, her voice firm. "I'm not talking about a paycheck. I'm talking about a place here. Not just as staff. I want you on security, full-time, with the authority to make the calls you made tonight." Ethan hesitated, the weight of the offer settling on him. For the first time in a long while, the idea of staying in one place didn't feel like a trap. It felt like a choice. He thought of Norah upstairs, finally sleeping again, and he nodded. "All right," he said. Olivia smiled faintly. "Good, because whether you realize it or not, you're the reason we're still standing." Outside, the storm began to break, the rain softening to a drizzle. The night had been long and brutal, but for the first time in months, Ethan felt like he could breathe. The danger was gone, the house was safe, and somewhere upstairs, a little girl dreamed without fear. And for him, that was enough. To me, the ending of this story is more than just the resolution of a dangerous night. It's a turning point for every character involved. Ethan doesn't just save Olivia's daughter. He dismantles the invisible wall between the help and the powerful. His courage proves that loyalty and integrity can outshine wealth and status, and that sometimes the person you least expect is the one who will risk everything for you. Olivia's transformation is just as important. By the end, she's no longer the untouchable CEO who measures people by their resume. She sees the value in trust, grit, and quiet strength. The moment she offers Ethan a permanent place isn't just a job proposal. It's an acknowledgement of his worth and a step toward becoming a more human, compassionate leader. For Norah, the impact is quieter but profound. She'll grow up remembering not the fear of that night, but the safety of Ethan's arms and the knowledge that bravery can come from anyone, anywhere. The real beauty of the ending lies in the fact that it's not happily ever after in the fairy tale sense. It's hopeful, but grounded. The danger is gone, but the bond formed in its shadow will shape their lives in ways they can't yet see. And that's the kind of ending that lingers.